The first time Ethan Hale woke before his alarm, he thought something was wrong with his body. His phone sat on the dresser, mute and useless without its glowing insistence. The house in Maple Ridge, Ohio, breathed around him, the slow tick of the kitchen clock beyond the hallway, the wind threading through the sugar maple leaves, the soft exhale of his wife sleeping. For a moment he waited for the panic to arrive. It always did. The bills, the presentations, the deadlines that clung like burrs to his thoughts. But instead there was a quiet unlike anything he had let himself face in months. It made him uncomfortable. He swung his feet to the floor and realized his hand had moved without thinking, reaching for where the phone would have been. It wasn't there. Last night at St. Gabriel's, Father Brendan had said something that lodged inside him like a splinter. If the first light in the morning is a screen, you have already surrendered your peace to whatever noise awaits. Let God be the first light. 10 minutes. He had challenged them to try it for 1 week. 10 minutes. How much could 10 minutes change? Ethan rubbed sleep from his eyes and found the folded index card on his nightstand. He had written in thick, lopsided letters, like a child copying from a chalkboard, "Lord, I offer you this day. Show me what to do with it." He cleared his throat, made the sign of the cross, and whispered the line. Somewhere in the house, the heater clicked on. The quiet stayed. He did not die from it. He did not vanish. He sat there breathing. And for once his first words did not form a complaint. Down the hall, Marisol woke to the smell of coffee that Ethan remembered to set the night before. Her phone, exiled to the kitchen, rested face down on a recipe book. She was a night shift nurse 3 days a week and a sleep-deprived mother every day of her life. Her mornings and nights had blended into a colorless smear. To their kids, the day began and ended with screens, homework on tablets, storytime on TV, notifications exploding like fireworks at the worst possible moments. She loved her work, and she loved her family. And the love felt thinner every month. The parish evening had surprised her. She had only gone because Ethan said he needed to do something before he did something stupid, like quit. The church was packed. The topic was simple: 5 morning mistakes that pull us away from God. The solution sounded even simpler. She had rolled her eyes at the simplicity. And yet here she was, without her phone in hand, listening to the house wake up. On campus 15 minutes away, Avery stretched under a gray fleece blanket in a dorm room that still smelled of November paint. She had promised herself not to check her notifications until after she prayed. But the habit dug in its claws. Her thumb hovered over the lock button, over the swirl of news and noise waiting behind glass. And she pictured Father Brendan's face when he'd lifted his hand and said, "Even 2 minutes of silence can reset a whole day." The chapel's stained glass had caught the last light, washing the sanctuary in rose and gold. Avery lowered her hand, stared at the ceiling, and let out a breath she did not know she was holding. "Lord, I don't know how to begin. I don't even know what to ask. Help me not to run away from you." At the far end of town, Deshaun angled his ride-share Prius into a parking spot outside an all-night diner. He had already been awake for 2 hours. Night shifts had a way of blurring the edges of his faith. 2. He told himself he didn't have the luxury of 10 minutes. The bills didn't pay themselves. And the notifications on his driver app wore him down to a wire. But the parish talk had followed him into the driver's seat. If you miss the hour of dawn, You missed the softest voice, the priest had said. He scrolled past the endless news about another shooting 3 towns over and the thread of arguments about who was to blame. He put the phone on airplane mode and closed his eyes. The first morning went like that across dozens of homes. St. Gabriel's had been an unusual sight the night before, a parish hall with coffee urns steaming like small factories. A whiteboard with the hand-sketched outline of 5 traps and a way out, forgetfulness of God. Idolatry of the screen. Complaint as default. Delay as habit. Drifting without purpose. A punchy phrase. A handful of stories of ordinary people with tired eyes. Ordinary people carrying extraordinary weights. 10 minutes to redirect a day. Father Brendan was not selling magic. He was a realist. He had the nervous energy of a man who had sat at hospital bedsides and in courthouse hallways and knew that advice that asked too much was advice no one followed. It felt like cheating to Ethan. Like a hack for his soul. He had expected the priest to tell them to wake up an hour earlier. To pray a full rosary before the sun rose. 10 minutes he could manage. 10 minutes might save him. On Wednesday, the second morning, the old habits attacked like a headwind. Ethan woke to a vibration in the kitchen. He had forgotten to silence the notifications on his email. He actually felt his heart speed up. The phone wasn't in the room and still it dictated his blood. Lord, I offer you this day, he said again. Quietly. Because the kids were still asleep and he did not want to wake them. He took the little Bible from the dresser drawer and opened to a ribbon he had placed there the night before. He read, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. He let the words hover in the air. The kitchen vibrated again. He closed the Bible and did not move. He waited out the 10 minutes. When he finally stood, the anxiety had dulled. He had not escaped the work awaiting him downtown, but something in him felt anchored. He lifted the phone. 3 messages from his supervisor, each more urgent than the last. He set the phone down without opening them and poured 2 mugs of coffee. At breakfast, the conversation found a groove it hadn't hit in years. What is this? Marisol asked, sliding into the chair opposite him. A kind of experiment? A kind of triage, he said. Before the day bleeds out on the kitchen floor. She laughed. He realized how long it had been since he had heard her laugh like that in the morning. I wrote a line down, she said. Felt silly. It helped. I think I'm going to tape it inside the medicine cabinet. What's your line? He asked. Thank you for breath. Show me who needs me first, she said. And please protect me from myself when I haven't slept. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's a good one. Eat, she said, smiling. And you should go check your email before your building invents a new level of fire. He nodded. But he did not jump. 10 minutes had given him a kind of space. He knew it would not fix the culture of his firm, or the way the numbers never balanced. But he felt less like a passenger on a runaway train. By Friday, the 3rd morning of their experiment, the news punched through the quiet like a fist. Someone in Maple Ridge had been beaten outside a convenience store. The single sentence in the push notification carried the electric charge of everything they had tried to resist: violence near home. The opinions already assembling like a marching band. The dread that soaked into the bones before real information had a chance to arrive. Ethan looked at the time. If he opened the story, he would not stop. If he didn't, he would think of it all day. He slid the phone into a kitchen drawer and clicked it shut. "Lord, I offer you this day," he said. He read the line he had chosen to repeat all week. He held the silence like a heavy book. 10 minutes could not heal a broken neighborhood or resurrect a stranger. But 10 minutes could choose what ruled his mind. At St. Gabriel's that evening, the parish hall filled again without an official invitation. People had seen the headline, and the rumors had grown limbs. The parish council had planned to rest after the well-attended event earlier in the week. But rest felt like betrayal. The folding chairs appeared as if conjured. The coffee urns breathed steam. A police officer named Ruiz stood in the back with his arms folded. A familiar face from Sunday masses. Parents hugged their kids too tightly. A high school basketball coach in a Letterman jacket wrung his hands. The battered teenager was his player. Father Brendan cleared his throat. He hadn't planned a second talk. He leaned on the lectern and looked at the faces gathered like a field of stars that had drifted too close to Earth. "I said 10 minutes could change your morning," he began. "And I meant it. I didn't say 10 minutes could change the world. But they can change the way we stand in it." He told them what they already knew but needed to hear in a voice that wasn't theirs, that the noise of instant commentary would not deliver them from fear. That the first responses to violence often became their own kind of violence. He suggested that the 10-minute dawn ritual could be their threshold to a different posture, gratitude in place of complaint, intention in place of inertia, God in place of a screen. Then he surprised them. "I want us to start the day together tomorrow. The sun will rise at 7:13. If you can, meet me on the church steps at 6:50. We will give God the first light. And then we will go walk to the convenience store together." The murmuring turned into an immediate clamor. Some people cheered soft amens. Others looked at their shoes. Who wants to pray on the sidewalk where a boy had been attacked? Who wants to stand in front of cameras or neighbors and choose prayer over the anger that shook their bones? Avery spoke first from the third row. "Will it help?" she asked. "If we show up? Will 10 minutes of prayer stop what happened from happening again?" "No prayer changes what already happened," the priest said. "Prayer changes us so that we can change what happens next." The dawn air tasted like metal. They arrived one at a time at first, then in trickles, then in a stream that filled the steps. Coats held tight against the late fall wind. No one held signs. No one brought a bullhorn. A reporter drove by and slowed, then sped away when he saw they had no spectacle to give him. Avery stood shoulder to shoulder with Officer Ruiz, surprised by how normal his voice sounded when he prayed. Deshawn had come straight from his shift, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and the index card in the other. Marisol had traded with a coworker to free the time. Ethan stood behind them both, feeling like the quietest man in America. Father Brendan did not preach. He walked them through the steps they had committed to try in their homes. Breathe. Think. Listen. Read one line. Speak one sentence of intention. Give away one small act of love before the day began in earnest. He read from the gospel and didn't offer an explanation. The morning light did that work for him, bending around their faces, gilding the griffin carved above the church doors. When he asked them to name an intention, voice low, no more than 10 words. The sentences came like shy birds. Help me forgive my brother. Protect our children. Give wisdom to our leaders. Teach me to be patient with my son. Show me who needs me first. Let me be brave without being cruel. After the 10 minutes had unfolded like a small, careful liturgy, They walked behind the priest to the convenience store. There were wilted flowers pushed up against the brick and a hand-lettered sign taped to the window asking for privacy for the family. The manager, a woman named Parvati, who had been at St. Gabriel's only once, came outside and stood with them. She did not pray. She stood. It was enough. An old man with his dog nodded from the corner. A teenager on a bike stopped and watched as they softly sang the doxology. There was nothing to film. They did not make a show of anger or righteousness. When the song ended, they dispersed into the morning. Deshawn paused before he left and told the manager he would bring coffee for her staff that afternoon. Avery wrote her number on a piece of paper and handed it to Officer Ruiz in case he needed student volunteers for anything the department was doing. Marisol squeezed Ethan's hand and said that it felt like someone had opened a window. The following week, 10 minutes became 12. Ethan set his phone to allow calls only from their parents in the early hours, then left it in the hallway. He started writing his daily intention on the back of receipts and tucked them in his wallet. The habit did not fix him. There were days when complaints slipped into his mouth before gratitude had a chance to speak. There were mornings when the alarm became a temptation and delay snagged his ankle. And he discovered that he had to make the sign of the cross before his feet hit the carpet, or he might not make it at all. But the drift that had once felt inevitable began to slow. He found himself less reactive in meetings. Once, when a colleague took credit for his work, he felt the old heat rising in his chest. He opened his wallet and touched the scrap of paper. Be a peacemaker today. It did not stop the wrong, but it stopped him from multiplying it. At the hospital, Marisol used phrases that surprised her. She began to say, before she entered a room, "Lord, show me who needs me first." She said it under her breath outside a trauma bay once. And when she entered, she realized the first person who needed her was not the patient clinging to a nurse's arm, but the nurse herself. Hands shaking, eyes wild. She took the nurse aside, let her cry for 30 seconds, then returned to the room together. Afterward, the nurse hugged her by the vending machine and said, "I was angry at the world. Then you made it small enough to hold." On campus, the ritual helped Avery refuse the little tyrannies that had ruled her mornings. She found that starting with silence made it easier to study without music blaring. She also found herself reading the hard news later in the day, when her heart had room for it. But the discipline did not absolve her of responsibility. During a student forum about the beating in Maple Ridge, a heated exchange between two classmates made the time feel like a lit fuse. Avery stood to speak and discovered that her 10-minute intention had chosen for her. Be brave without being cruel. She asked questions instead of making declarations. She named the pain without assigning motives. A professor told her afterward that her calm had been like cold water on hot stones. Deshawn wrote his intention on the inside of his left wrist with a fine-tip pen. Sometimes it smeared by noon. Sometimes it lasted until midnight. One day the line was a simple word, mercy. A drunk in the back seat spit insults at him for 7 miles. At a long red light, he pressed his finger to the word and did not reply. The man fell asleep 2 minutes later. When he woke, he apologized, sheepish and embarrassed. Before he left the car, he said, "God bless you." And Deshawn believed him. In the wider town, not everyone appreciated the parish's quiet practice. Some critics online rolled their eyes at the idea of prayer as any kind of public stance. They accused the parish of hiding from the debate, of choosing piety over policy. The parish was not given a break if they had chosen signs and slogans. They would have been accused of being noisy and performative. In choosing silence and presence, they were accused of being too passive. The argument itself had its own gravitational pull. Ethan felt it every time his thumb rested on the phone and his blood warmed. But he had begun to notice a difference in himself. When he entered online comment threads late at night or early in the morning, he fought ghosts he never met. When he started the day with God, he noticed the people who were already next to him. In mid-December, St. Gabriel's organized something new, not a march or a rally, but a morning of purpose. It would be the parish's version of the 10-minute ritual magnified. A morning to pair prayer with deliberate acts of care. People signed up to deliver coffee to schools, write notes to the families on the block where the attack had happened, sweep the sidewalks of the convenience store strip, stock the food pantry. The sign-up sheet filled in 2 days. On the appointed morning, they gathered again at first light, breath puffing white, hats low over their ears. They prayed for 10 minutes. They read a single line again, one that had become a refrain: "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Then they scattered like seeds. In 2 hours the sidewalks were clean. The pantry shelves groaned with donations. By afternoon the convenience store manager had put up a second sign: "Thank you, Maple Ridge, for the small things that are not small." Ethan found himself deeper in conversation than he had planned to be, hauling crates with a man who turned out to be the father of the kid who had been beaten. The man's name was Julio. They did not talk about justice or policy. They talked about soup and traditions and the price of eggs. Later, as they leaned against the pantry door, Ethan said the line he had written that morning on the back of a receipt: "Be a peacemaker today." Julio nodded slowly. "I don't know what that looks like for me yet," he said. "Maybe it looks like this for now." He lifted his chin toward the van, where his nieces were singing to themselves as they taped labels on cans. "Maybe that's what keeps me from burning down my own head." In the weeks that followed, not every morning was beautiful. Maple Ridge did not become a postcard. There were more headlines. There were more arguments, some of them in their own pews. There were practical questions about what men like Julio should do when the system seemed bored with his son's pain. And there were people frustrated that morning rituals had not delivered legislative changes they longed for. Father Brendan refused to pretend the 10 minutes were a broom. "They're a compass," he said in a homily after the gospel reading about the wise and foolish builders. "If your house falls in a storm, you will need a hammer and lumber. But if it falls because you didn't build on rock, you will need a different foundation to put your tools upon." At the office holiday party, Ethan watched as a coworker told a joke that punched down in a way that had once slid past him. People laughed. Mention of the convenience store incident skidding into a cheap laugh about the neighborhood. He touched the paper in his wallet and felt heat rise. A righteous version of the earlier anger that had almost swallowed him. "Be a peacemaker today" was not a line that meant be quiet. He did not wag his finger. He simply said, softly but firmly, "Not that, man." The room stuttered and pivoted and the conversation moved on. Later, 2 people thanked him in the hallway. Marisol found herself walking with a patient's mother out to the hospital parking lot at dawn a week before Christmas. The woman was undone by a mess of injustices that were bigger than any single morning could hold. "People think prayer is a way to avoid reality," she said to Marisol, jaw clenched against the cold, I think you're one of the first people who used prayer to face it. I used to use it to hide, Marisol admitted. Now it's how I step forward. On campus, Avery helped organize a small morning group for students who were not sure they believed in much of anything. She told them the ritual worked even for doubt. Gratitude, intention, silence, a phrase from the gospel, an act of love. She said they could start with a line from any scripture if they had to, as long as they faced beyond themselves before the screens dictated the day. I'm not recruiting, she laughed. I'm inviting. A surprising number came. One day in January. They prayed on the steps of the library while a snow squall laced the air silver. A boy who had mocked religion in freshman seminar cried without warning, and two girls put their hands on his shoulders. The 10 minutes ended before anyone felt ready to move. When Lent came, St. Gabriel's added a simple step to the ritual, before voicing their intention. They named a complaint they were surrendering, not pretending it didn't exist, but refusing to let it rule the day. Ethan's first surrender was small and humiliating. I surrender the need to check my phone before I breathe. Marisol surrendered resentment toward a coworker who coasted on others' energy. Avery surrendered the acid thrill of winning arguments. Deshawn surrendered the anger he carried like a spare battery. The act of naming made the day feel like a path you could see, not a cliff you had to scale. On Easter morning, the parish gathered in a pre-dawn that felt like the pages of a new book. They did not need a lecture about mornings anymore. The sunrise itself did the speaking as they sang in a low chorus. Candles lifted. They knew the 10 minutes did not cancel the darkness of Friday or the hard silence of Saturday. They knew that violence and injustice still stalked their town and that arguments on screens could still hook their nerves. They also knew that a different first light was possible, and that it turned them in a direction they wanted to walk. After Mass, Ethan stood on the steps drinking coffee and found that he could picture his life in two frames, the mornings before he let the quiet in and the mornings after. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a saint. He still raised his voice more before breakfast than he wanted. He still scrolled late at night and let strangers wire his brain with their fury. He still made work an idol and used complaint as camouflage when he was tired. But he no longer believed he was helpless. A daily practice had not cured him. It had given him a lever. Behind him, Father Brendan spoke to a small circle of teenagers, telling a story about a woman in the parish whose entire face looked 10 years younger after she learned how not to begin every day with a sigh. Across the lawn, Officer Ruiz knelt beside a kid who had wandered from his parents and showed him how to retie his sneaker lace. The gesture so gentle it was almost invisible. Deshawn lifted a bag of donated groceries into the trunk of a car and stepped back as the driver. A grandmother with watery eyes said God bless you with the weight of a benediction. Avery took a picture of the church door with her film camera, a thing she had found at a thrift store, because the way the light hit the wood made her think of lines of a life written by someone else. Let God be the first light. 10 minutes. A ritual like a handful of bread on an empty morning. A habit of small choices. Begin with a cross, a line of scripture, a silence wide enough to hear, a sentence of purpose, a single act of love, a screen held at bay until your soul has stood up and opened its eyes. It was not a banner. It did not fit into a headline, but it changed the way they walked down their streets. The following week, another incident broke the town's thin peace. This time, more people showed up at dawn. The 10 minutes were not a retreat. They were a gathering of breath before work. Some brought letters they had written to their council about street lights and patrol patterns. Others brought coffee to the night shift clerks who acted like therapists and bouncers and cashiers in one exhausted body. A few brought the children who would inherit whatever the adults did next and let them watch the sunrise turn the steeple from slate to wheat. Late that afternoon, after the small and not small work of the day had dulled into evening, Ethan sat on the back steps of his house and listened to the last of the light move across the yard. He thought about how in the world he might explain the last months to someone who had not lived them. The story was full of subtleties, of moments that would not make sense if you measured everything in spectacle. It was not a movie. It was a pattern. He closed his eyes and pictured the morning the parish stood on cold stone. An odd congregation with no agenda and 100 specific purposes. He remembered the morning after, when he caught himself about to complain and chose a blessing instead. He thought of the meetings where he had declined to add another angry line to a room already full of them. He thought of Julio leaning against the pantry door, holding his daughter's hand. The next morning, his 10 minutes opened like a door and for once did not feel like work. It felt like returning to a room he loved. He read a single line, then sat in silence, then wrote his intention on a scrap of paper and tucked it in his wallet. Be a peacemaker today. He said it aloud once. A small, plain sentence that didn't sound heroic and didn't need to. Then he stood, kissed his wife on the forehead, and went to wake the kids for school. If this story reached you, I'd love to hear your voice. In our towns and on our screens, we are all facing hard questions about violence and injustice. Where do you see the roots of these wounds where you live? And what do you believe brings real change? Do you think habits like a 10-minute morning ritual strengthen or distract from efforts for justice? Share your stance and your reasons in the comments. Speak with clarity and charity. And tell us what you've seen that actually helps. Your perspective matters.